Hey everyone, today I want to look at the node editor over here in detail. So far we have a bunch of other videos that I have a video that looks specifically at the viewers up here, one that looks at the spline editor, one that looks at the keyframe editor, one that focuses just on the timeline here. So the last sort of piece of the puzzle in terms of sort of main components to the interface is this node editor down here, and that's what I want to focus on today. So to access this node editor, we just come up to the top here, we click on nodes. So that turns it on and off. So I'm going to get rid of a few others. I'm going to get rid of the spline editor, get rid of the keyframes, and we're going to focus just here on the node editor. Now this tutorial assumes some familiarity with using the node editor. To go through some of the very basics, take a look at one of the videos that I'm going to link above right now. And even if you're not very familiar with the node editor, I still think you're going to get a lot out of this tutorial. It's really aimed at the basics. So let's just take a very quick look at the interface here as far as the node editor is concerned. So just at the top here, this is kind of where the node editor and the timeline kind of separate themselves. So the node editor includes this toolbar here. And this toolbar here essentially has all the main tools that we're probably using. And it has them grouped in a bunch of sort of logical sections here. For example, this section over here is all 3D. This section here is for particles. This is for different shapes, that type of thing. You can turn that toolbar off if you want by coming under Fusion and Show Toolbar. We're going to keep it on for now. And down here you see this Media Out node. So this Media Out node is the only mandatory node that is needed in a Fusion composition. It's always the very last node in the hierarchy, and it essentially says, okay, we're done all our stuff now. Everything is that we're going to be creating feeds into this Media Out node, and the output of this Media Out node is what's passed back to the cut or the edit pages to use in conjunction with all our other clips and the rest of our video at large. So just to help sort of visualize, we're going to bring in an example here, and I'm going to go up to this effects library here. I'm going to come under templates, under particles, and we're going to pick this burning engine particle example, and I'm going to drag that down. And as soon as we drag it down and we kind of zoom out, we see, okay, there's a whole bunch of stuff that's been created here. And the goal of this tutorial is not to go through all this stuff, but I am going to use all the nodes that we see here to demonstrate the capabilities of the node editor. But I don't want to get too hung up on what each one of these nodes actually does. That's a subject for another video. In fact, this burning engine is a tutorial that I'm working on. I want to go through this one in detail because I think it's a pretty cool particle animation. So what I can do is take all the stuff that I brought in here, and I can take this last node here in the chain, and I'm going to hook it up to this Media Out node. And then I'm going to click on this Media Out node, I'm going to drag it up into this viewer here. But I just wanted to give a good sense of what we're sort of getting into. So up in this viewer to the right, you can see the animation that's produced by this node tree here. And the first thing that I want you to notice on this node tree here, this node structure here, is the different colors of these components. So we'll take a look at these blue ones, for example. We'll zoom in on these blue ones here. This is a Shape 3D node, this is a Shape 3D node, a Merge 3D node, and a Camera 3D node. So all these blue ones here happen to be from the 3D group, which is this group up here. So I'm not going to go through all the colors, but different groupings that you sort of see in this toolbar here are going to have different colors associated with it. But let's not get too far ahead of ourselves right now. Let's just talk about some simple navigation in the node editor. So I can use my middle mouse button, I can hold it down, and I can move everything around like this. I can hold down my controller and my command key, and I can scroll my mouse wheel. That will zoom in and out. I can press Control or Command 1, and that will sort of zoom to its default value here. You'll notice one thing that happens sort of up to this top right corner here. As soon as any one of these nodes kind of goes off screen, this node Navigator pops up here, and this really just helps when we have a very complex scene to just kind of know where we are. And I can click anywhere in here. I can click down on this one here, and we're going to center on that particular node. So that's set up to pop in when I go off the screen. I can also just push the V key and it pops up. So I'm just going to zoom in full here, and you'll notice there's this grid in the background here. I can turn that on and off if I wish. That's under the options. I can come over here, I can say Show Grid, turn that off if I don't like it. I'm going to put that on for now. So you'll notice right now when I move this node around, it's snapping to the grid. So if I want to turn that off, I can come over here to Arrange Tools, and I can take off this checkbox here that says To Grid, and then I have a little bit more fine control of where I place things. If things have kind of gone off grid a little bit and I want to clean things up a little bit, I can right click on here and I can go Line All Tools Up to Grid, and that'll snap to this closest grid location. I can also turn on this feature here called to connected. So arrange tools to connected. And essentially what that will do is as soon as it comes up, for example, this node here is connected to this node. So as soon as it sort of comes near that, it's going to kind of snap relative to that node. But it's not going to do anything down here with respect to this node here. It's just the stuff that it's connected to. So that's kind of handy as well. Now these lines that connect between nodes, these are called pipes, and you can set these up in a couple different ways. So if I right click here, I go to options and I go, there's orthogonal pipes and direct pipes. And right now I have orthogonal pipes, meaning it's always going to form 90-degree angles, and the lines are always going to be forced to be horizontal or vertical. If I change that to direct pipes, you'll notice it's just direct lines right in between the nodes. This can get a little bit confusing, I find. That's why I prefer the orthogonal nodes, but it's really just a preference. Now you'll notice right now I have nodes off screen and we can't see our little navigator. That's because I do not have this auto navigator checked. So if I check that, that will show up as soon as I sort of move any nodes off screen. Alright, so how do we add new nodes into the editor? Well, one way is coming up to what we did before, coming into the effects library and bringing in a whole bunch of sort of pre-designed systems. But what I'm really talking about is just adding single nodes at a time. So there's a number of different ways you can do that. First, you can just come up to the toolbar and drag things in. So for example, this is where our mask shapes and stuff are. So if we wanted to grab a rectangle, for example, and bring this down here, we could just drag it and drop it in. And it creates a node that's not connected to anything. I can also replace from the toolbar, so I can grab this rectangle, I can come down onto soft glow, I'll drop it directly on top of there, and a dialog comes up and says, do you want to do a replace? I'm just going to say no for now, but that's a quick way to do simple replaces. So we can drag stuff in from the toolbar. We can also come back up to effects and we can just come under tools. Whereas under templates, these are systems that are already created with many nodes. Under tools is where you'll find all the categories for the single nodes, and there's a whole bunch of them, and we're not going to go into them too much here, but you can kind of go through each of these. So if we come under color, well, here's a whole bunch of different color nodes that we can bring in. We can also access this similar tools menu by right clicking down in the node editor, add tool, and you'll get a similar list that you see here. One other very handy tool is when you hold down shift and spacebar, it'll bring up this select tool here, and this is pretty helpful when you kind of know what you want, or you can navigate through things one by one. The disadvantage here is these are all the nodes. They're not grouped sort of nicely like it is up here in this tools menu. It's just everything alphabetically, so it's best to know what you're looking for. But if I want to just type text, for example, well, that filters down to text, and then I can just select one of these here and add, and it brings it in for me. So I can also come up to any node and I can right click on it, and there's this insert tool and replace tool. So insert tool, I'm just going to come down, I'll pick anything, I'll take this bitmap mask. That is going to insert it, and it's going to insert it sort of in context. Depending on what node that I choose is going to determine where it's sort of been placed. Is it before, is it after, which one of these little inputs or outputs does it connect up to? And I'm going to get into that in more detail later, so I just wanted to show the insert functionality, and we're going to talk about all these little triangles in more detail after. So let me just delete that. I can also do replace from here as well, and I'll just pick whatever, and that's going to give me that dialog again to replace that particular node. I'm also going to bring a blur, for example, and I want to insert a blur into here. And then there's the long way I could do it. I could kind of come in here, I could double click on pipes, by the way, it does a delete. So if I double click on that, it deletes. Then I could sort of hook up to here, and then all right, okay, and so on and so on and so on. Much too much work there. So what I can do is, I'm going to delete that blur, just drag the blur directly on top of this pipe, and that you see the pipe turns to that yellowy blue, and I release, and it's inserted it within. I can hold the shift key now and grab this blur, and I can pop it right back out again up to if I want. So let me just delete that for a second, and I'm going to bring in, for an example, this rectangle node, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to bring it in here. I see that change color, and I'm going to let go. Okay, so it inserted that rectangle node, but if I grab it and I drag it around, well, it's not actually connected. And that's because it's kind of meaningless to have a rectangle node at this point in the hierarchy. This rectangle node we would use normally as a mask for something else. It would feed into something else. For example, I could kind of connect it up to this soft glow here as an input. But in any case, again, we're going to get into those details after. So as far as deleting nodes, if I want to delete the soft glow, I could delete this directly in here, and it keeps that connection live. Now I'm going to do some group deletes here. I'm going to grab these two here, and I'm going to press the delete key, and you'll notice it keeps this pipe from this renderer node across into this media out node. I'm just going to undo. Now I'm going to grab everything, including this render 3D node and these two soft glows. I'm going to do a delete, and you'll notice the connection now is broken. And again, that's just because of the different types of nodes, and we're not going to go through all the nodes here. But once you get to understand the function of what all these different nodes do, it makes sense on how they kind of connect up to each other. So this is just really something to keep in mind, that a lot of these operations might not make sense. They might behave a little bit differently depending on what part of your node hierarchy you're interacting with. But with time and use, it will all kind of come together and make sense. So you notice I'm just going to select this soft glow right here, and up in our inspector, you'll see that soft glow 3 has been selected, soft glow 3. You can select multiple nodes here, and they're going to show up stacked on top of each other. And you have to work on these one at a time, but that might be a handy way to do things so you're not always selecting nodes that you want to work with. If you want to just work on a group of particular nodes, they're all going to show up under this inspector, and then you can kind of work on them one by one. Notice though, right now I had these two selected, and there's always, in any group selection, there's always one single active node, and that active node in this case is the one with the red box around it, and that's the soft glow 3, because that's what I have selected here. If I switch over to soft glow 2, now we see that this one here has the red. So I'm going to select these three here, for example. All three of them show up there. None of them are active right now. I'm going to click on soft glow 2. That becomes the active node. Alright, I want to talk about merge nodes for a little bit. So a merge node is essentially a separate node that merges multiple nodes together and kind of passes them along down the chain. So for example, say I had these two text nodes here, and I wanted to merge those together to blur both of them at once, for example. So I would put the two text nodes, a merge node, and then followed by a blur. So one of the ways I can merge these two together is bring down a merge node here, connect up one, and connect another. Okay, that's kind of the long, slow way. Easiest way is just to tie the two outputs together. So grab the output of one, drop it on the output of the other. It generates a merge node for you, and it puts them together. Now, I want to talk about these little triangles here, these little inputs, because these are specific to each node. They're going to be different for each node, and it's pretty important that you understand what their functions are. It can be pretty easy to get these mixed up, and you can get sort of weird results. It can be kind of tough to debug, but if you just sort of pay attention to what these nodes are and what you connect to them in the first place, you're going to have a much easier time. What we can do is we can just hover over each of these little triangles and we get what they are. So it's going to say the name of the node, so in this case merge one, and then dot foreground. So this is the foreground input. We come over here, and this is merge one dot background. So when we merge these two together, I'll bring this merge node up here, we'll take a look at it. There's no text here, so I'm just going to put a 1, and I'm going to make it really big. And then this text 2, I'm going to call it 2. I'm going to make it really big also, and I'm going to change the color just to pink, I guess, or something like that. Okay, so now we see the white, which is the number 1. This is plugged into the foreground node, so it is in the foreground. Now if I want to switch the two of these, all I do is select my merge node, and I go Control T. And you'll notice that the 2 is now in the foreground, and you'll notice these colors flipped. So just pay attention to this here, and I'm just going to Control T a couple times, and you'll see things flip back and forth between the green and the yellow. So that's an easy way to switch inputs on a node with multiple inputs. So this last triangle down at the bottom here is the effects mask input. I'm not going to get into masks too much. They're covered in a bunch of my other tutorials, but essentially they're just saying, okay, you know what? I don't want to apply this thing to the entire space. I want to isolate it to a certain region, and that's what masks come in handy for. I'm going to get rid of this merge node for now. I'm actually going to get rid of this text node here. So we'll come to our text number 1, and let's say I'm going to bring it up to the viewer here. I'm going to put in multiple viewers here, and I'm going to put this over in viewer 1. I'm going to turn off viewer 2. So I can add things to these viewers in a couple different ways. I can just sort of drag up. Each node also has these two little dots down here. This is the first viewer, this is the second viewer. So I can just click on this to turn it off. I can also highlight a node and just click number 2 or number 1. So I'm hitting number 2, turns it on and off, 1 on and off. You can also right click on it and say view on, and then sort of pick your viewer here. In any case, so I have this text node here, and one of the things that I've done is I've changed the size from the default value up to 0.5, so it's much larger. So here's a couple things that I'm going to do. First, I'm going to take this text node, I'm going to do a copy with a Control C, then I'm going to come over here and a Control V. So you'll notice what that did, that copied over the 0.5 as well. But if I come back to this first one here and I change the size of this first one down to whatever, something else, and I come back to the second one, it's still set at 0.5. So that's a copy. That's a non-instanced copy. That's a separate, completely separate copy. It has nothing to do with this first one. What I also can do is I can Control C to copy, and then if I just come over here anywhere in the node editor, and instead of just Control V, I'm holding Control Shift V. Now when I Control Shift V, you'll see it adds this little green line. This green line means this is an instance of this here. And the naming convention is instance underscore the name of the node, in this case text1. Well, first of all, in this instance version, so it's copied this 0.2244 value. But if I come up to the text, and I'll change this to 1, for example, then I come down to this instance node down here, which I'll put up in the second viewer. It has also changed its size. So if you look at the right viewer over here, this is the instance node. The left viewer is the original node. So it works both ways. Whatever I change in either of these two nodes is going to be reflected in the other one. So if I were to take that size, for example, and bring it down, you'll notice both of them change. So these two are linked together. If I don't like this little green line, I can come over anywhere over here. I can come down to options, and I can say, or I can come down and I can take off show instance links. I'm going to keep this on right now because it's kind of a handy thing, right? It's easy to forget that you instance something, so this is a good visual reminder. Now, one really cool copy and paste feature that probably a lot of people don't really know about is the fact that you can take one of these nodes and you can copy and paste it out into a text editor. So let's say I did all this wonderful stuff with this text one underscore stuff, and I wanted to send it via email or something to one of my buddies. Okay, all good. Control C. And I've just brought up an instance of Notepad here. So I'm just going to click into the Notepad and Control V. There we go. So that has brought all the information from that text node in there. So I can just take this, I can send it off in an email or a file or something. I can also do the inverse of this, is do an import. And I'll show you how to do that now. So we can, I'm just not going to save this here. Okay, so now we're back in Fusion. I'm going to right click on whatever I want to export, and I can come down to settings and I can go save as, and that'll save it as a .setting file. And that .setting file is effectively what I just showed you. It's just the text that I copy and pasted into the Notepad. So there's a couple different ways you can get it into that into your text editor. So whatever, I'm not going to save this, but if I did, I would come down here, I would go settings and load, and I could load that settings file. Very quickly, to change colors or the name of nodes, pretty simple. I can just sort of right click here and go down to set color, and I can change that to whatever color that I want. You'll notice that does not reflect the instance. I'd have to change that color in itself, but I can do multiple select, and I can change colors, you know, to whatever. If I wanted to rename a node, I just highlight it, I click F2, and then put in whatever I want. If I want to sever this link here, now one of the things we noticed before I sever the link is it didn't matter which one of these I changed a value in, it was reflected in the other one. So there wasn't really a parent-child relationship that you have to change the parent and that affects all the different children. In this case, or when you're changing values, it sort of goes both ways. But when we want to break an instance, you have to come down to the child, right click on it, and it's this D instance here. So if you take a look, if I right click on the parent and I go D instance, it's grayed out. So I have to come down here, I'll go D instance, and there we go, we're broken. Okay, I'm just going to undo a couple times just to reestablish that instance. So as far as instances so far, we kind of talked about these are direct copies of each other. So maybe I want a parent node, and then I'm going to do a control, and then I'm going to copy another instance down here. So here I have child 1 and child 2. So these are two separate instances, and right now they're all sort of the exact same. So I'll put child 1 up here and child 2 up here. Let me just take off this checkered underlay just so they look the same. So maybe I want to do a bunch of stuff that's common, so I want to change the color to, I don't know, this yellow. So they both update there. But maybe I want to have them different sizes. So I would come down to this one here, select child 1, and what I can do is I can come up to this size, I can right click on it, and I can go D instance, and that's just going to separate this particular parameter, and everything else is going to track the same. So I'll go D instance, and I'm going to do the same thing with child 2. I'm going to come up to size, I'm going to go D instance, and now the sizes are completely separated. So I look at the parent, I change the size. No, that doesn't do anything. But I go to change the color again. I'll go to this blue here. That's still set up. That works. And now I come down and I can change the sizes independent of one another. So every parameter that you see here, you can right click on it and you will see that D instance set up, and that's really what that means. If you ever want to know some information about a particular node, you can just just hover over it and a tooltip will come up, and this will give you a bunch of information. So this particular one here, it says its parent, that's its name, it's a text plus node, and then it gives a bunch of more details about resolution and bit depth and so on. You'll also notice on the status bar down here, whenever I come over a node, there's going to be a bunch of similar information. So I'm going to move back over to our sort of larger example here, and I want to talk about the concept of upstream and downstream, because you can do selections of a bunch of stuff downstream from a particular node or upstream from a particular node. So all that really is, and it's quite visual in this case. So if I were to take this directional force node here, everything downstream, well, that's everything that comes after it. Everything upstream is the stuff before it. And I can right click on any particular node, and I can come up here to select, and I can go upstream, for example. So we see if I zoom in here, so that's selected these 3 nodes upstream. Now if I go downstream, the question is, okay, is it going to pull all this stuff in? Because this comes in and connects into this merge node. And no, it should just pick stuff downstream. This stuff here is not downstream from this node. So I'm going to right click on this, I'm going to go select downstream, and it selects just these nodes down here and ignores all the stuff up here. Okay, let's just come back over to our simpler example over here. Let's say we have this text node over here, and I have a blur node up here, and I have a color node, or sorry, a brightness and contrast node. There is no problem for certain types of nodes. Not all of them can be split, but this one I can take here and I can plug this into multiple separate nodes. I can kind of split it, and I can sort of come back here and rejoin it afterwards with this merge node. I'm going to start with a fresh particle, a P emitter node here. So this here is sort of the basics of particle systems, and if you take a look at the playlist I have up at the top right, I have a whole series that talks just about particle systems, and it's one that I'm going to continue to add videos over time, because it's a whole world in itself. But in any case, for this particular emitter node, let's say I don't like this value of this default value of lifespan here of 100. What this lifespan is, this really means that anytime a particle is created through this emitter node, it's going to last for 100 frames. So maybe that's a little bit too long because I don't have a very powerful workstation and it's kind of choking my system. So say I wanted to change that down to 10. So I can do that. I can change that to 10. I can right click on this node and I can go to settings and I can go save default. And what that means is when I bring in another emitter node later on, lifespan is set to 10. So if I ever want to set that back, I just have to grab any one of this particular type, an emitter type in this case, and I come up to settings and I can go reset default. First of all, it'll reset the default for this particular node, and also when I bring in a new node here, you'll see it's all set back to the 100. There are a couple special nodes to sort of help annotate things and organize things, so let's talk about those now. So first I'll talk about the sticky node, which is essentially like a post-it note. So I'm going to use my shift space to bring up my select tool. I'm just going to type in the first few letters here, and then we see sticky note, and we see a little sticky note pop up. Now it has two forms, this note. This sort of condensed version, when I double click on it, it expands, and this expanded version I can sort of resize to whatever I want. When I click on this X, it brings it down to this smaller size, which I can move around, but I cannot resize it. This works the same way, so it's called Note 1 right now. In terms of renaming, I can hit F2 and whatever, new name. I can open this up here, and I can, and so I can type a whole bunch of notes in here that'll be helpful if multiple people are working on this particular thing, or I want to remind myself of something. It can be pretty useful. Get rid of that for now. Another handy tool, so shift space again, I'm going to type underlay. So underlay here. So it's this underlay node here, and this is just essentially a way of grouping things. So again, you could go rename that if you want, and this is fully resizable. So what you can do is you can just take a bunch of nodes and you just sort of put them in there, and then off you go. Now if I want to delete these underlays, I can click on the underlay, and if I press delete, that's going to delete everything. So I'm going to undo that. So if I want to delete just the underlay and leave the nodes, when I do my selection, I Alt select or Option select, then press the delete key, and that just deletes the underlay. I can also take these, and I have all the three of these selected. I'm going to right click and I'm going to go group, or I can also use Control G. And that can kind of, that's what I was talking about when I can kind of snap things up a little bit. And you notice here I have all my my input and output ports kind of exposed to the outside of this group. I can double click on this group and sort of move it around. I can resize this, and you can see that there's its inputs and its outputs. I can right click on a group and I can go ungroup, and that just gets rid of things. So just to drive the point home in terms of the difference between an underlay and a group, an underlay is more of a visual thing. You can't really collapse it. You can still, of course, connect things, you know, inside and outside, but it's really just a visual thing to sort of help you visually group things. But a group is a bit more functional because you can collapse it and you can still have access to these nodes here. So depending on what you want to use, they're both available. Alright, so we're back over to our main example here, and each of these nodes we can also look at in a bit of a different thumbnail type fashion. So I can right click anywhere here, and I can there's this whole series of these force commands here. So if I want to force all tile pictures, so a tile picture is effectively a thumbnail for each of these nodes, and you can see that it takes up a bunch more space, but you can kind of get this visual icon of what the node is. So that might get a little bit hairy when you have a big structure such as this. So then maybe you want to just go down, instead of force all tile pictures, say just force active tile picture. And then whichever one you select just shows the appropriate thumbnail. There's also a couple other ones here, force source tile pictures. So what a source is, so I'm going to take off active tile pictures here, and I'm going to put on source tile pictures. So what sources are is really things that happen at the start of the chain. They're sort of the things that kind of begin generating things. So a source would be, in this example, these emitters, because they're emitting particles. Particles are born here, so that's a starting point. And you can also, I'll take that one off and I'll put on masks. So if you wanted to just highlight all your masks, that's an easy way to do it there. There's a couple other modes here. I can set it to locked. Then this little lock icon shows up. That's always kind of handy to protect us from ourselves. Alright everybody, so that's what I wanted to cover today. So we've gone over extensively everything within the node editor. And again, I encourage you to check out my series on Fusion Basics. That's going to cover pretty much everything in the interface. Also feel free to check out my particle series playlist. That's a series of growing videos that is just focused just on the particle system. So it's really just a very small piece of what Fusion has to offer, but a very powerful piece of what Fusion has to offer. So there's a lot of interesting things that we cover in there. Anyway, thanks again, and we'll talk to y'all soon. Bye.